Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Fairies, Fae, Pixies, all names for a creature type and description that's universal to fantasy games including MTG. These are small winged humanoids with a magical prowess and mischievous nature. They're pranksters, thieves, lighthearted but selfish. Again, these creatures are making a return to the MTG storyline with Throne of Eldraine, which features new fairies in this latest set. Let's run down the lore of fairies in MTG and see how those on Eldraine could fall into the greater description of this race. On the plane of Eldraine, fairies are more properly known as pixies, a nice fairy tale twist on the creature type. However, even in Throne of Eldraine, pixie is not an established creature type in and of itself. In fact, only two other cards in MTG's history ever even mentions pixies: Argothian Pixies and Pixie Queen, who both still have the creature type fairy. Despite being referred to as pixies, these creatures on Eldraine are still better known as fairies. While pixies aren't a supported creature type, fairies sure are, with my greatest memory of fairies coming from the Lorwyn set around the time when I first started really playing Magic, and they were a super interesting and powerful tribe back then. The Fairies of Lauren and Shadowmoor, the evil counterpart to Lorwyn, were amusing, gossiping tricksters who stole the dreams of others for they couldn't dream themselves. This staple of stealing knowledge was cemented as a blue trait of the fairies that continued to magic to this day, even on Eldraine. But that's not to say all fairies were just harmless dream farmers. Others were cruel and vindictive, holding on to grudges and spite, acting out of malice in their short lifespans. This gave us the Black Aligned fairies, who would harvest nightmares and leave people husks with their magic. There's a careless side to fairies, and that too is seen in those on Eldraine. Fairies on Ravnica certainly encompass the blue aspect established by those on Lorwyn. They steal pages from Izzet tomes, play pranks on the Azorius guards, and even trick trolls of the Gruul. Their small size and relatively harmless pranks have made them more of an inconvenience to the citizens of Ravnica than anything else. More of an afterthought, but still, really nice to see them represented on Ravnica. Fairies have an interesting origin story on the plane of Ugrotha, where the Homeland set took place. Fairies aren't native to this world, but were created by a figure known as the Autumn Willow, which was sort of like a guardian of a forest. In creating the noble fairy, the king of the fairies, Devon, they became her forest protectors, pushing those that she didn't like out of her lands. Devon, this fairy noble, would go on to be a legendary figure on the plane, filling more of this nature sprite, green-blue aligned fairy we see depicted in some of the cards in Throne of Eldraine. On Alara, fairies are actually sort of rare, especially following the conflux which fused the broken plane back together. Fairies were once seen on the Shard of Esper and were basically little mechanics, working on their Ethereum-infused machinery on the Shard. After the conflux though, their fate as a race seems suspect. Perhaps they flew off to the neighboring shards and took on new traits, but we're gonna have to wait until we return to find out more. And the last known example of fairies would be on the plane of Dominaria, where we again see this trickster, knowledge-stealing, blue-aligned sprites that have become so iconic to this race. With just a few cards depicting fairies in our return to Dominaria, we turn to more of Dominaria's past to learn more of this creature type. Like the fact that an elvish tribe actually used to summon, and this isn't a joke, flaming fairies when they engaged in combat. These fire sprites could cast fire magic and had a burning aura around them, so I wouldn't count these as native fairies, but it's still really interesting to see this kind of distinction to the race. Jumping through the planes, it lands us right back on Eldraine. Throne of Eldraine has brought fairies back to a super familiar form. All those who love the fairies we got in Lorwyn will be happy because on Eldraine, they're mirroring a lot of those influences. We have blue-aligned fairies, a lot like those on Esper, Dominaria, and Lorwyn, who love knowledge and steal it as a means of playing pranks on others. Fairy Vandal and Tome Raider both show how fairies on Eldraine will steal and outright destroy books containing knowledge just so people forget the things they've learned. Their idea of a good prank is to disrupt people's interpretation of history, which in its own right is dangerous, but Still, there's even a darker side to fairies on Eldraine. Similar to those found on Lorwyn, some fairies on Eldraine have formed cliques or small groups in gangs in order to embezzle, steal, and hoard as much wealth as they can. Greed defines these swamp fairies, who use intimidation and mob tactics to get what they want from others. You see this on the card Eye Collector, who asks others to pay tribute to their leader before he will even hear them out. Their leader is a fairy known as Rankle, the Master of Pranks, and his influence is still very much unknown. Pranks for these fairies seem to span far and wide, and all have some common goal tying them together. Perhaps these blue fairies, stealing and rewriting history, do so under the instruction of Rankle, who then sells it back to the original owner. Either way, it shows a darker side to fairy society here on Eldraine. Even worse though is another legendary fairy with a unique color combination, Aleli, Artful Provocateur. In her flavor text, she describes the pranks of Rankle as being childish, and that hers will topple kingdoms. To them, they look to one-up one another, and their pranks are rated by how much disruption they can create. From her title, we know that Aleli does not just meddle in secrets and history, but sabotage, undermining governments and setting up diplomatic traps. She'll pit one kingdom against another by spreading lies and gossip about one side to the other, just to see the kingdoms burn. Fairies on Eldraine really don't mess around. Outside of these cliques though, we get what I would describe as a more naturalistic fairy, similar to those that we see on Ugrotha in the homelands. Those sprites who care about the nature of wild things, living in the forests and rarely interacting with people. This is seen in the Mara Leaf Pixie. This sets up a potential comparison to be made between pixies and fairies on Eldraine. While all have the fairy creature type, true fairies seem to be pranksters or mob bosses, while true pixies are those nature sprites just looking for the treasures of the wilds. There seems to be an awesome distinction that I hope is expanded on more in Throne of Eldraine. Anyway guys, that's just a quick rundown on how some of the fairy races are depicted across the multiverse of MTG and on different planes. They certainly share a similar identity with common traits that differ only slightly from world to world, but like on Lorwyn, I believe fairies will again shine brightest on a world like Eldraine, who already has 2 legendary fairy creatures with possibly more to come. That opens up so much potential story of fairies in MTG, not to mention Oko, which he is a Fae planeswalker. Though not physically resembling a fairy or pixie, he comes from a world of fairies and mischievous prankster Fae, so the lore ceiling for this race just got raised. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about fairies and what you've seen so far from Throne of Eldraine in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button, share, and of course subscribe to the channel, hitting that bell so you never miss out on our latest lore video. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!